My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and for nearly 5 decades I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of Hazelbrook Orchards, a small organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. My hands, though stiff with arthritis, still remember every step of turning dough into sourdough loaves and pruning trees. At dawn with Richard, my husband. 3 weeks ago I buried him. Richard and I had been married since 1981. We built everything together, this orchard, this home, this family, and yet the morning after his funeral I realized that I might not have built what I thought I had, or maybe it just wasn't enough to hold on to my children. Richard died of pancreatic cancer, 14 months of watching a man of the earth waste away, his strength stolen. Bit by bit, he didn't want the kids to let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow he had whispered to me one night, his voice thick with morphine, and because I loved him I agreed, but in truth I already knew. Our children, Darren and Samantha, had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Darren, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in Bostora's financial world and hadn't been home for more than a handful of weekends in over a decade. Samantha, on the other hand, floated from one failed wellness business to another, always funded by Richard's savings and always in need of just one more loan. I had hoped that grief would bring them back to the core of who we were, that they would remember the orchard, the house. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals, family dinners, the love that built this calculating an estate. The night after the funeral, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I told them we could sort through Richard's things together the next day. It was a small gesture, a mother's way of making space for memory, but they had other plans. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains. Richard and I had picked out together 30 years ago. I made coffee, the simple kind Richard liked, not the imported blend Darren had brought from Boston, and waited at the kitchen table. They came downstairs dressed sharply, Darren in a blazer he didn't bother to remove, Samantha in a silk blouse and perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were heading to a business meeting, not sitting down to remember their father. Mom, Darren began, placing his coffee mug down with that same precision I'd seen in his father. We've been talking. Samantha glanced at him, then at me. We think it's time to start settling things, the estate, the business, the house. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. Settling. It's practical. Darren said you can't run the orchard alone, and the house, it's big. Mom, too much for someone your age, my age. The words sat heavy in the room. I had pruned those trees beside Richard through blizzards and heat waves. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. We want you to be comfortable, Samantha added, her voice smooth like a sales pitch. There's a wonderful retirement community 2 hours south, Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, friends your age. I stood to clear the breakfast plates, needing motion to hide my shishing hands. Then Darren pulled out a folder. Dad spoke to me about this last toward me. He wanted Melissa and me to he said, sliding a set of documents. That was the phrase Darren used as he slid the papers toward me. I looked down. It was printed on Darren's corporate letterhead, and there it was, Richard's signature. Steady. Too perfect. He hadn't written like that in months. Not since the morphine dulled his hands and blurred his vision. This isn't from our family lawyer, I said quietly, not looking up. He was lucid when he signed it, Darren insisted, his voice clipped. He wanted this, Samantha added quickly, like they'd rehearsed it. A fresh start. There's a developer interested. $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for. A developer. They wanted to sell the orchard. Level it. Replace a lifetime of harvests and sustainability and love with asphalt and cul-de-sacs. You're talking about destroying your father's life's work, I said, barely above a whisper. Mom, be reasonable, Darren replied. The orchard can't last forever. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. A slow, rising fury I hadn't felt in years, not since the time I chased off a fox from the chicken coop with nothing but a rake and my voice. I looked at both of them, my children, and said with a steadiness that surprised even me, "Show me the will." Darren hesitated, then slid the folder closer. I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed," I said, standing up. "We'll talk tomorrow." But in my bones, I already knew there would be no real conversation. They weren't grieving. They were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed Richard and I had shared for over 40 years, listening to the familiar creaks in the farmhouse walls and the soft hush of wind in the orchard trees outside. Every sound still belonged to the life we had built. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become foreign. By morning, the scent of coffee drifted through the house. But it wasn't the warm, comforting smell of home. It was bitter. Imported. Darren's kind of coffee. I moved slowly. Not because of age, but because betrayal aches in places no medicine can reach. When I came downstairs, they were waiting, coats on, suitcase packed. The suitcase wasn't mine. "We packed some essentials for you," Samantha said brightly. "We thought we could drive you to Sunnyvale today. Just to look. You don't have to decide yet." "I'm not going to a retirement community," I said simply, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Darren checked his watch. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork's done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here." "I've lived here my entire adult life," I replied, my voice calm, even. "This is my home." "It's all of ours," Darren said, flat. "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I stared at him. And for the first time, I truly saw him, not the boy who once followed Richard through the orchard asking questions about bees and frost, but a stranger in my kitchen. A man who saw me as a liability. A loose end to be tied up and packed away. "I need my medication," I said, stepping away. "And I'd like to grab a few family photos." Samantha nodded, relieved. "Of course. Take whatever personal items you want. We'll ship the rest." I went upstairs. I didn't cry. I gathered my pills, yes, but I also reached for something they didn't know existed. Behind the mirror in the bathroom, in a panel Richard had installed in the 80s during a rash of burglaries, I pulled out a slim envelope. Inside, my passport, my birth certificate, and tucked behind them, a key. In the bedroom closet, behind Richard's old flannel shirts, was a small fireproof box. Heavy. Inside, the original deed to 20 acres of land purchased in my maiden name before I ever became a Whitmore. Land with water rights. Land essential to any future development. Land no one could touch, not without me. When I came back downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my heart was lighter. "Ready?" Darren asked. "Sure," I said softly. I let Samantha take my arm. Let her lead me to the car. Let them believe I was beaten, folded, done. We drove past the orchard, its early blooms just beginning to blush against the green. Past the elementary school where I once volunteered. Past the library where I read to children whose names I still remember. They didn't know they were driving me through everything I had ever fought for. And they didn't see that I was already planning children, but instead of taking the highway towards Sunnyvale, Darren veered onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said as casually as if he were announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours now." Samantha's smile faltered. "Darren, what?" "She'll contest the will. Make scenes. This is cleaner she has. Clothes her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door and just like that they left me standing on the side of a road with nothing. Or so they thought. The car disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust. And the smell of betrayal. I stood still. The wind tugging at my coat, clutching the small suitcase they had packed for me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't broken. I was free. I began to walk, not toward the gas station Darren had so generously mentioned, but toward town, toward my next move. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming the back of my neck, but with every step my purpose solidified. In my purse was everything I needed: my ID, my passport, my medication, and most importantly, the original deed. to 20 acres of prime orchard land. That Darren and Samantha didn't know existed land I had purchased in my own name before Richard and I married. It was a precaution back then, just in case the business didn't survive. Richard had called it our just-in-case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't just any land, they held the only natural water source on the entire property. Without it, no irrigation. Without irrigation, no orchard and no development. My children thought they had cornered me, but they didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered and aching, but I reached the edge of Hazelbrook and the familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It was small, old-fashioned, and unchanged, a place where people still called each other by name and paid in cash. I sat on the bench outside and watched the cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase, but I had something far more powerful than they ever would. The truth. Ray Miller stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd known me for over 30 years, Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his brow furrowing. You all right? You look a little pale. Just resting, Ray. Been a long day, I said. He looked at the consom. Real sorry about Richard. He was suitcase beside me, then back at me with a good man. Yes, I nodded. Yes, he hesitated, then asked gently, you need to use the phone if it's not too much trouble. He led me inside past the shelves of canned peaches and discount cereal to a small office in the back. I dialed the number from memory. Our family lawyer, Harold Jennings. Naomi, he answered on the first ring. Surprised I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will. Reading. My grip tightened on the receiver. What reading? There was a pause. Darren presented a will I had concerns. It didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I need your help, I said, my voice clear, and your discretion. You have both my office. 1 hour. I hung up and turned to Ray. Do you sell prepaid phones? He nodded. If you want one, yes, and a bottle of water. He refused to take my money on the house. Mrs. Whitmore, you need anything else, you just say the word. His kindness nearly undid me, but I didn't cry when I buried Richard, and I didn't cry. I couldn't. I had work to do, and I wasn't finished yet. Harold Jennings' office sat on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. The kind of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in the power of a firm handshake and a spoken promise. His secretary, Helen, looked up from her desk as I entered, startled. Oh, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like a glass of water? Coffee? I'm fine, thank you, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Harold met me at his door. He hadn't aged much since Richard's last visit, perhaps a little more stooped, but his eyes remained sharp, thoughtful. Naomi, he said, gently, using my middle name as he always had, come in. He didn't lead me to his desk, but instead to the 2 worn leather chairs by the window. We sat across from each other. He folded his hands and looked at me with quiet gravity. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the funeral, the cold, clinical conversations in my own kitchen, the suspicious will with the perfect signature. I told him about the car ride, the suitcase, the suggestion of a retirement home like I was luggage to be dropped off. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. Just listened, nodding now and then, his brow darkening as the story unfolded. When I finished, I reached into my purse and pulled out the fireproof box. Inside was the original deed to the 20 acres Richard and I had set aside decades ago, titled in my maiden name. Land that included the only natural water source on the property. The same land they couldn't sell without me. Harold took the deed with a reverent sort of silence. This, he murmured, tracing the document with his finger, Naomi, this is gold. This isn't just land. This is leverage. With the water rights and the zoning boundaries, the developer can't touch anything without your consent. I know, I said quietly. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the deed thoughtfully. And that will they presented. It's a forgery. I had my suspicions the moment I saw the signature. Too clean. Too steady. No man under hospice care signs like that. So we challenge it? I asked. We do, he said firmly. But it'll take time. Meanwhile, we use this. He lifted the deed. You still legally own the most critical piece of land. Without this, they can't move forward with the sale, not legally. I looked at the quiet leather of his chair, at the papers between us. I don't want revenge, Harold, I said softly. I just want my home back. And I want them to understand what they've done. Harold's face softened. Then we'll make them understand. First, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to know that the property isn't what the deal was suspended. The developer, faced with legal complications and the stunning revelation that the most vital portion of the land, including the only natural water source, was owned separately and never disclosed, began to backpedal. Fast. Their lawyers reached out to Harold, scrambling for clarification. I told them the truth, Harold said simply, as we sat across from one another in his warm, wood-paneled office reviewing documents. The land is incomplete. The water rights are non-transferable. And more importantly, your children do not have the authority they claim. That evening, I received a text message from Samantha. It was the first time I'd heard from either of them since they left me on the roadside. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? Fix this. I stared at the words on my old prepaid phone, the screen flickering faintly in the dark. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just panic, because the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply. Later that night, Darren called Harold directly. His voice, I was told, was sharp, desperate. He demanded explanations. He tried to reassert control. But Harold was calm, measured. He informed Darren that all further communication would go through legal channels. Nothing else would be entertained. They're realizing now, Harold said the next morning as we sipped tea on the balcony of his office, just how badly they miscalculated. They thought I had nothing left, I replied softly. But I had everything they forgot to value. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded with quiet pride. You're handling this with grace, Eleanor. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth. I shook my head gently. I've lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter now. But I won't be silent either. Outside, the town of Hazelbrook moved on with its day. Children rode bicycles down uneven sidewalks. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Someone mowed their lawn, and the scent of fresh-cut grass floated through the late morning air. Life was still simple here. Still honest. And I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold. Not now. Not like this. The orchard that Richard built, the legacy he left, it was not a commodity. It was home. And I wasn't done protecting it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. Instead, I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Hazelbrook's main street. It had a small balcony just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. Every morning the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread greeted me before sunrise. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine. And that mattered. I began teaching again, quilting classes on Wednesday nights at the community center, just like before. On weekends, I held workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came. Retirees came. Young couples came, hopeful and curious, dreaming of their own farms. People listened, not because I raised my voice, but because I carried history in my hands. Decades of work. Soil. Growth. Memory. And then, quietly, I made a decision. I donated the water rights to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative supporting young farmers and sustainable practices. I placed the rights into a trust, one that couldn't be sold or exploited. They would use the water, not profit from it. They would care for the trees the way Richard did, with patience and respect. That was the future I wanted. Not control. Not power. Stewardship. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I heard whispers through town, whispers that the developer had pulled out completely, that the will had been formally challenged and frozen. That Darren's name wasn't landing as easily in his financial circles, and that Samantha's newest venture had quietly closed. Their reputations had taken a hit. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be allowed to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The orchard remained untouched. It bloomed as it always had in the spring, rows of white blossoms dancing in the wind, soft and eternal. And every time I passed by it on my walks, I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who remembered her worth. And never let them take it. I became a woman they didn't recognize. Not because I had changed, but because I had remembered. They had underestimated me, but I had finally reclaimed not just my land. I had reclaimed my voice. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing there alone with a suitcase I didn't pack, watching my own children drive away without a second glance. That moment should have broken me, but it didn't. Because in that hollow, aching silence, I finally heard a truth I had ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question. And being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal just because you raised the ones who betrayed you. Darren and Samantha thought they could erase me. That because I was older, grieving, and quiet, I wouldn't fight back. That I would hand everything over without protest. But they forgot something. Before I was a wife, before I was a mother, before I became a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something from the soil up. With her hands, her heart, and her mind. And I had never needed to raise my voice to be powerful. What they mistook for weakness, my silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very thing that saved me. If you're listening to this, if you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to know this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even in quiet stillness, it echoes louder than any betrayal ever could. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed. And my life? It's mine again. So to anyone who's ever been told, this is where you get off, I say, walk if you must. But do not leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose. Walk with quiet power. And when you're ready, tell your story. Because it might just save someone else. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, tell us. Your story matters.